$50 billion estimated that are lost every year in Medicaid.
If you pass a continuing resolution, won't that just refund all the programs that he says he's cutting that are full of waste, fraud, and abuse?
Well, we haven't negotiated that yet.
We have a couple clips of CNN host Caitlyn Collins, who does great work, shutting down MAGA stooge Mike Johnson, only further exposing the ineptitude of MAGA and these dangerous tax cuts that they're trying to force through. So be sure to smash that like button. It helps us out a ton. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with the very much needed context.
You know, there's about $50 billion estimated that are lost every year in Medicaid, just in fraud alone. No one's for that. We've got to make sure we eliminate it. We have the algorithms now to do that.
You won't be surprised to learn that this is complete propaganda. He is citing a report that clearly states that these payments were for eligible health services for eligible Medicaid recipients with no nature of fraud around them, but that the documentation was either missing or there was just something incorrect. It could be as small as date, right? It's not at all fraud. They literally specify that. And the rates of these instances drop year over year as Medicaid gets more effective. To say this warrants $50 billion to be cut is to leave millions without care for no fraud. Also, if that was the case, wouldn't the obvious move to be to take that $50 billion that's being used for fraud and then reinvest it back into Medicaid where it's efficient to be sure that money is going to the people who need it? Why instead is it then being invested into tax cuts for billionaires? Oh, it's because the real goal is for rich guys who don't rely on Medicaid to fund their child's birth or community health centers or special needs care or for their grandparents' long-term care, and instead to take that extra tax money and put it in their pockets.
Well, you just talked about how important the work that Elon Musk is doing is. If you pass a continuing resolution, won't that just refund all the programs that he says he's cutting that are full of waste, fraud, and abuse?
No, look, you can. That's why I say you add anomalies to a CR.
Caitlyn Collins from the top rope. This is what I love the most. You put these little clowns into logic corners and they have to just scramble for the answer. If anyone really thought these programs and agencies were full of fraud and waste and abuse and all of these things they're claiming, why would you continue to even fund them at all? Aren't you then just funding the fraud that they're being used for? Oh, it's because there's actually no fraud being found, and it's just whatever fat they feel they can cut and get away with electorally while selling it as some efficiency scheme and keeping it within the reality of that so your base buys it up. Sadly, though, like with most MAGA logic, the entire thing falls apart on its face if you critically think about it for more than half a second.
How
They're
long would
standing
that
by that. So
CR go, do you believe?
Well, we haven't negotiated that yet, but if it's a CR, it may be an entire year-long CR with some anomalies on it. You know how all this works, but it's not what we prefer. We would like to do individual appropriations bills, but it takes both parties to negotiate that. And right now, the Democrats are trying to, it looks like, trying to set up a government shutdown. We can't allow that to happen.
I mean, it's kind of funny to see MAGA, after they won the presidency, the House, and the Senate, that they still want to blame Democrats for shutting down the government when they know that they're probably not going to be able to pass these things because they can't efficiently govern. It's pretty simple. The party and majority in the House has budget responsibility. If you control all three chambers, it's on you, brother, and keeping the government open, and that's your one responsibility. That is Republicans and Democrats should play ball in keeping the government funded. However, Democrats were not voted in by their constituencies, whose will they are to reflect, to cut Social Security or Medicaid or food stamps. That's Republicans, right? So Republicans should be trying to do this legislatively. But if they're going to try and shove this into the budget, which is supposed to just be about funding to keep the government open, but they know they don't have 60 votes to pass these things, so they want to force it through the budget to pass it in the House, and when you know how it goes, right? They better have the votes among their party if they want to do that. If not, then it's on them, because this isn't what Democrats are here for. Democrats are reflecting the will of their voters from voting against this. It is not their fault that you're trying to force that into the CR to give you leverage of, oh, well, now we can blame the Democrats. It's just a self-report on your own party's inability to do the most basic function they have. A self-report on your inability to pass your own agenda that you ran on and campaigned on as legislation. So instead, you have to try to force it through in the budget. It's all self-reports about how inept your own party is. But somehow MAGA will convince themselves that this is like Democrats. And the sell so far has been online that they're saying, oh, well, no tax on tips and no tax on overtime and no tax on Social Security just got passed. not even in the resolution, not what resolutions are for. It's just allotting the money that's going to be spent. And the funniest part about it all is when you break down the money that's going to be spent, the money for no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security legitimately doesn't exist. It's not going to be in there. We can already tell. They have 4.5 trillion max they can do. 4 trillion is the cost to renew the tax cuts from 2017 that they're going to do. 2 to 300 billion is the cost for the corporate tax cuts. They want to lower it from where it would be 21 under the 2017 to like 15, I think is where he ran. They also want to do tax cuts for businesses that produce and manufacture in America, things like that. That's 2 to 300 billion. That only leaves 2 to 300 billion that you can spend. No tax on Social Security is $1 trillion program. No tax on overtime is a $700 or $800 billion program. No tax on tips is $400 or $500 billion minimum. And to keep that on top of that, if they can't cut $2 trillion in spending, that number goes down to where it could be forced down to where they only can do $4 trillion in tax cuts. So only the 2017 thing gets passed. What's going to happen is they're going to leave this stuff out. Then they're going to say, well, the Democrats blocked us from cutting enough. So because we couldn't cut enough, we couldn't afford, because the Democrats wanted to protect fraud and they wanted to. I can already see how it's going to happen, because it's already shown in the budget that they don't have the room to do it, but they're still promising it. So obviously they, in their minds, have worked out some way that they can blame the Democrats for it down the line. Like, it's just pathetic.